In Sokovia, driven by the desperate hope for independence, two brothers, a charismatic politician named Dmitri Belov and an iron-fisted general named Arkady, start a revolution for their people and become inspiring figures for Sokovia. Soon, the brothers become more than leaders and symbols of a better future. Moved by their leader's passion and conviction, the Sokovians sacrifice everything, facing the mighty Russian force with nothing but sheer unbreakable will. However, as the death toll spirals into an unthinkable massacre, the world watches in horror, wondering when or how the bloody conflict will come to an end. Soon, the answer to the question on everyone's mind becomes apparent as Dmitri is killed in a Russian airstrike, taking the heartbeat of the revolution with him. Then, the revolution starts to crumble slowly but surely. As a heartbroken General Arkady is left to navigate the ruins alone and fails to control the region. Soon, the revolution dies, and the general is captured and imprisoned for the war crimes he committed in the name of freedom. 17 years later, an unsettling rumor reaches Arkady, shaking him to his core. His brother, the martyr of their revolution, had betrayed him and everything they believed in by faking his death, and was, in fact, still alive. Enraged by this discovery, Arkady desperately hopes to face the man who abandoned him, gathers his men, and orders them to find Dmitri at whatever the cost. Hence, as the group does their own research to find out more about the allegation, their intel leads them to a local man whom they one day seek out and ask for information on Dmitri's whereabouts. Frightened by the criminals, the man runs for his life. After a few minutes of breathless chasing, Arkady's top soldier, Vlad, and his girlfriend Tatiana work together to catch the man and present him to Arkady. Desperate to find out concrete intel on his brother, Arkady hangs the man upside down and starts brutally torturing him for information. 3 months later, elsewhere, a retired U.S. military soldier named Michael Knox, who is still distraught over the death of his brother-in-arms, Andy flies to London, England, to visit Andy's widow, Rachel, and her 15-year-old daughter, Dany. Lost in his thoughts, Michael arrives in London before he knows it and gets a cab to his hotel. In the cab, the cheerful driver turns on the radio and enjoys the latest reports on the upcoming European semi-final game between West Ham United of England and Dynamo of Russia.
But tell me, big man, whereabouts you from? From the States.
Until Michael, who's not a fan of football and wishes to be left alone with his brutal thoughts, asks him to turn it off. The driver complies with the request. Meanwhile, on the other side of London, Dany asks her mother, Rachel, for permission to go out with her friends, and an intense argument ensues as Rachel reminds the teenager that she's grounded. The annoyed Dany texts and informs her boyfriend Brandon that she can't meet him. Unfazed by this, Brandon encourages Dany to defy her mother, and Dany leaves the house by discreetly jumping out of the window and climbing down. As a man sneaks up behind her and holds on to her, acting instinctively and courageously, Dany defends herself well and is surprised to see that the man is her uncle, Michael.
She scared the shit out of me, Uncle Mike.
Dany warmly greets Michael, who, after admiring her instinctive fighting skills, surprises her with a ticket for the West Ham game that night and offers to take her there. Despite being excited, Dany politely declines the offer and confesses that she's grounded. Determined to show Dany a good time, Michael heads to Rachel's bar, hoping to persuade her to give him permission. While there, he notices an old photograph of himself with Andy, and the emotions he has long tried to suppress come rushing back, pulling him into memories of the good old days. Luckily, Rachel soon walks in, inadvertently interrupting Michael's spiral down the rabbit hole, and warmly greets him. Then, as the duo catches up, Rachel notices the grief etched on Michael's face, senses his guilt, and assures him that Andy's death was not his fault. Then, Michael fondly remembers how much Andy loved to spend time with Dany, and begs Rachel for permission to take the teenager to the game. After hearing out the war veteran, Rachel reluctantly agrees. Later that night, as thousands of fans gather at the stadium, Arkady, who has followed the trails of his brother to London, prepares to infiltrate the arena. Hence, Arkady's technical advisor, Victor, disguises himself as part of the press and gains entry, while the rest of the team impersonates a team of paramedics and enters the arena easily. On the other side of the arena, Dany runs into Brandon and excitedly introduces him to Michael, who instantly dislikes the young man and advises Dany that she can do better. The duo then heads to their seats, teasing each other and having fun.
Let's get a hot dog.
You want a hot dog?
I'm starving.
The duo then takes their seats, appreciating the size of the stadium and the electric energy of the fans. However, as the deafening cheer of the crowd echoes throughout, It dawns on Dany how much her father would have enjoyed this moment, and she quickly unravels, wondering why Andy had chosen to sacrifice his life to protect others instead of staying safe for her and her mother.
He was a soldier, took an order.
Well, it was a shitty order.
Sympathizing with the grieving teenager, Michael tries to comfort her to no avail. Then, following Dany's request, Michael leaves to get her some food. As soon as her uncle leaves, Dany goes to meet Brandon at his seat. Elsewhere, Victor makes his way to the press section and momentarily switches the power off around the arena. As soon as the power returns, Superintendent Steve Thompson checks on his staff in the control room to ensure that everything is in order, but misses the fact that the security cameras around the arena are now blind. Victor then announces the status to the rest of the team, who quickly follow Arkady's lead into the control room and kill all of the staff, except the superintendent. Then, as the officer reels from the ordeal, Arkady orders him to follow his orders and cooperate with them, but the old man refuses to betray his badge until Arkady threatens his beloved family.
That Sarah, Chloe, and Ben would want you to make sure that he stays in his car.
Once the superintendent is scared into submission, Arkady starts his operation. Meanwhile, in the stands, Michael returns to his seat, is shocked to see that Dany isn't there, and calls her in hopes of finding out her whereabouts, to no avail. To make matters worse, seconds later, following Arkady's orders, all the transmission towers around the stadium are compromised to ensure that no communication will be made with the outside world, and the thousands of fans in the stadium are effectively cut off from the world. Then, as planned, Victor taps into all of the security cameras around the stadium and starts running a facial recognition program to find Dmitri.
It will find him.
We hunt by computer.
As the game continues, Michael frantically searches for Dany around the stands and soon meets an assistant steward named Faisal Khan, whom he recruits to help him search for the teenager. After a failed attempt to contact the control room about Dany, Faisal agrees to take Michael there and leads him. At the elevator, Michael and Faisal meet one of Arkady's men named Andrei, posing as a guard, who convinces him to escort them to the control room and join him inside the lift.
How come you got Ron's badge?
As chaos ensues, Faisal whimpers in fear, while Michael quickly gets into soldier mode and fights with Andrei, before fatally shooting him. Then, Michael grabs Andrei's radio and access card, and, after giving Faisal some orders, proceeds to deposit the body in the bathroom.
What? What is it?
It's chilling how quickly and easily Michael transformed from a loving uncle to a soldier. There, Michael goes through Andrei's bag, is shocked by what he finds, and realizes that the situation is more grave than he first thought. Then, following Faisal's lead, Michael finds the only working walkie-talkie, expertly recalibrates it to find the police frequency, and reports the takeover of the arena. Suspicious of the information, the dispatcher contacts the Metropolitan Police Chief Commander Daniel Steed, who, after carefully listening to the report, calls the superintendent, under a disguise, and assesses the matter.
Steve Thompson.
Steve, hi, this is Chris Burrows from Telecoms.
I understand you're having some problems with your phones.
Unaware of the superintendent's coercion, Chief Daniel takes his phone conversation at face value, reaches out to Michael, whom he believes is nothing more than a prankster, wasting police time, delivers a stern warning, and kills the transmission. Such a detailed prank, really. Elsewhere, Tatiana holds a check-in with each of her team members. Following the unusual response, Tatiana reports her suspicion about Andrei's well-being to her boss, who sends a couple of his men to check on Andrei. Moments later, the men discover their colleague's bloody body and report the situation.
Andre is dead. Shot.
Police?
Police don't leave dead bodies in toilet cubicle.
Meanwhile, Michael and Faisal use Andrei's access card and try to escape the looming danger. However, unbeknownst to the duo, Arkady follows the movement of the access card, locates them in the kitchen, and sends more of his men, Anton and Vlad, to attack them before contacting Michael on the radio.
Our intentions are to threat, not violence.
So let's make a deal.
Then, hoping to spare the terrified Faisal any more trauma and danger, Michael shows him a picture of Dany, orders him to look for her, and sends him away, while he stays back to come up with a strategy to deal with the criminals. Moments later, the highly armed Anton and Vlad reach the kitchen, and a brutal fight ensues. After minutes of an intense battle, Michael manages to kill both men, and, as soon as he finds a momentary respite, reports the situation with chilling calmness. Distraught by the news, Tatiana rushes to the kitchen, sees her boyfriend's lifeless body, and, overtaken by grief and rage, she smashes everything in sight. Meanwhile, hoping to finally get the police's attention, Michael takes Anton's body to the roof and throws it down to the concession stand on the outside of the stadium, causing chaos that finally summons the police. In the control room, seeing the seething Tatiana, Arkady checks on her ability to continue with the mission.
Can I kill him?
Of course. You will stamp him out.
From the roof, Michael notices the group of officers now surrounding the stadium and breathes a sigh of relief, as he hopes they can finally take control of the insanity. As Michael fights to quiet the storm brewing in his mind, he's luckily rescued by the chief, who arrives on the scene and uses the walkie-talkie to apologize for dismissing him earlier and asks for an assessment of the situation. Michael details everything he knows about the situation and details his stake in the matter.
I appreciate what you've done here,
But a lone hero at this point.
And his team rush into the newsroom to coerce a journalist into broadcasting their demands at gunpoint. Moments later, the men execute everyone in the room, live on air, sending shockwaves through the nation. Utterly horrified, the chief activates an emergency protocol and alerts the SAS to aid in resolving the unprecedented matter. Meanwhile, inside the stadium, oblivious to the chaos unfolding outside, the football game continues, and the fans obliviously enjoy themselves, with only semi-final qualification on their minds. Michael then reaches out to Faisal, who is still searching for Dany, and orders him to keep the matter to himself, as panicking the fans will only lead to a stampede and more disasters. Inside the control room, Victor goes over the security footage, identifies Michael as the one hunting his colleagues down, and continues searching to learn as much as he can about him so that they can find something to use against him. Meanwhile, desperately hoping to resolve the matter as fast as possible, the chief calls Arkady to set up negotiations, but it all goes sideways. Elsewhere, after witnessing the horror unfold on the TV, the public surrounds the stadium, dying to know what's going on with their loved ones inside, and the police try as hard as they can to contain them. Among this crowd, a terrified Rachel, who had watched the broadcast in her pub and driven like a maniac to the stadium, stands at the front line. On the other side of the perimeter, an agent named Cho arrives, and after inspecting Anton's body and confirming the nature of the matter, enlightens the chief about the complex situation.
Thousands have gathered in the street at the mere mention of Dmitri Belov's name.
Hoping to rescue the lives of the thousands of fans inside the stadium, the chief urges that Dmitri be located quickly and handed over to his vengeful brother. However, Agent Cho resists and argues that they can't expose their government's collusion with Dmitri. He adds that if the matter escalates and Dmitri is killed live on TV, it will destabilize the entire Russian region and endanger the lives of millions, and clearly states his mission.
If Arkady kills him on live TV, it'll cause a shitstorm.
In the control room, as Victor continues searching for information on Michael, the group learns about Dany's identity and her relationship to the veteran soldier and decides to use her as a bargaining chip. Hence, they go on the PA system and politely ask her to report to the control room. Meanwhile, Dany fights with Brandon, beats him up, and as she returns to her seat, she hears the announcement, and, to the horror of Michael, proceeds to follow them. No! Dany, it's a trap! Desperate to stop Dany from walking into the lion's den, Michael frantically reaches out to Faisal, who soon locates the teenager and scrambles to reach her. Meanwhile, Michael also spots Dany from afar, and as Vicor tracks him through the security camera, he rushes towards her.
Set your police on him.
All available men to the northwest corner. Take him down.
As Michael fights off the guards, still screaming on top of his lungs for Dany, she finally sees him struggling from afar and comprehends that something is seriously wrong. Then, before she can process the full extent of everything, to the relief of Michael, Faisal quickly grabs her and rushes off with her. Moments later, with the help of Faisal, Dany and Michael are happily reunited and hoping to get out of the terror. Michael asks Faisal to lead them to a secret exit. Faisal leads the duo to a door, but just as he proceeds to open the door, Michael notices something strange and stops him. Upon closer inspection, Michael realizes the door is rigged to trigger an explosion. Following the trail of C4, he is more shocked to discover numerous bombs planted beneath the control room. Overwhelmed by the revelation, he shares his findings with the chief, who, along with Agent Cho and the SAS Captain Reynolds, takes a moment to learn as much as they can about the explosives.
Why place it under the control room? They'd die in the blast as well.
Then, as the officers realize that the only reason Arkady hasn't triggered the explosives is that he hasn't located Dmitri yet, a heated argument ensues, until Michael steps forward, with a bold idea.
I can get Dmitri. Give me his location. You get Dany out of here with him.
However, before the officers agree to the daring plan, Michael sets a condition that if he delivers the target to the extraction point, Dany must be rescued along with Dmitri. Once everyone agrees, Michael coordinates the details of the plan with the officers, and Faisal secures Dmitri's location and begins to put the operation into motion. As Michael prepares to embark on the dangerous mission, Dany is overcome by the thought of losing the father figure in her life, and memories of her father's death flood her. Hoping to persuade her uncle to stay, she begs him to remain behind and prioritize surviving for her rather than risking his life for strangers. Hiding his own fear and doubt, Michael promises Dany that everything will be all right before setting off on his daring one-man mission. With the second half of the game starting, Michael sets out from hiding to execute his plan. As soon as Michael starts his journey to the dynamo stand, Victor catches him on the security camera and, together with Arkady, figures out his plan.
He's going after Dmitri. Tatiana! Send everyone!
Moments later, Michael sees Arkady's men, led by Tatiana, approaching him from different directions, takes one of the paramedic motors and starts speeding through the arena, with the criminals in tow. After a few minutes of a high-speed chase, Michael finds himself on the roof and radios Faisal to safely bring Dany there for the extraction. Then, Michael expertly evades Tatiana's shots and, weighed down by the responsibility to ensure Dany's safety, jumps down 60 feet to land on the roof of the dynamo stand and reach his target. Enraged by her failure to catch Michael, Tatiana radios Victor and orders him to follow Michael's movements in the stands, which leads the men to Dmitri. Then, at the sight of his much-changed, long-lost brother, for the first time in 17 years, the hardened criminal Arkady is taken aback and momentarily freezes. Elsewhere, fueled by her personal vendetta, Tatiana changes her plan and trails Faisal and Dany, whom she soon finds.
No.
Meanwhile, Michael flees the stands while holding Dmitri at gunpoint and briefly explaining the situation. However, moments later, Arkady's men ambush Michael and Dmitri, who soon become cornered. Then, as the men advance on the duo, Michael's years of experience kick in, and he single-handedly takes them all out with a modified explosive. Now, temporarily out of danger, the duo heads to the roof, where they find the chopper waiting for them. However, Michael soon realizes that Faisal and Dany are nowhere to be found, panics, and radios the steward for an answer. Within seconds, the situation escalates rapidly and turns into a pressure cooker for Michael, who's forced to make a bold decision.
Send Dmitri up!
I can't do it.
Then, as soon as Michael announces his decision, the captain finds himself in an unyielding tug-of-war between Agent Cho, who orders him to kill Michael and rescue Dmitri, and the sensible chief, who orders him to stand down and follow Michael's lead. However, as Agent Cho's threats mount, the captain goes against his better judgment and reluctantly orders his men to open fire on Michael. Is this how to treat the lone hero who has done everything to salvage the situation? On the ground, Agent Cho accuses the captain of purposefully missing the shots and sabotaging the mission, before getting into a heated argument with the chief over who has jurisdiction to make final calls on the operation. Having had enough of the agent's arrogance, the chief punches him. Somebody needed to teach the agent a lesson. Elsewhere, in the control station, Dany looks out on all the obliviously blissful fans in the stands who have no idea that they are living out the last few minutes of their lives, and challenges Tatiana's ideals.
You would kill all these innocent people just to get one person.
Then, Arkady radios Michael and orders him to bring Dmitri. However, before he can resist this and tries to negotiate the matter, Michael hears Dany's desperate cries through the phone and becomes suddenly overwhelmed. Despite acting aggressively and smashing everything around him, deep down, Michael remains crushed by the weight of the pressure to rescue Dany and becomes paralyzed with fear of letting Andy down again. Seeing this, Dmitri tries to comfort Michael with the notion that one must make tough decisions for the greater good. However, it all falls on deaf ears, as Michael wallows in grief for his fallen brother in arms. A few moments later, realizing that the only way to salvage the chaotic situation is to act, Michael forces himself up from under the crushing weight and firmly proposes a trade to Arkady, Dany, for Dmitri. Then, both Arkady and Michael go up to the roof to exchange their prisoners, but the negotiations start to go sideways quickly.
You, go.
If you give him his brother, Uncle Mike. He'll kill all these people.
Without even thinking about it, Michael chooses Dany and asks her to make her way towards him. However, realizing that Arkady will kill everyone once he finds his brother, Dany resists and offers to sacrifice her life for the sake of the public until Arkady sends her a scary warning. Wow, what a selfless transformation for the brave Dany. Then, Dany starts walking to her uncle, but soon receives an unexpected warning. Soon, all hell breaks loose as the police and Michael cooperate to take many of Arkady's men out, while Dmitri and Dany escape. Then, while Arkady chases after his brother, Tatiana and Michael get into a brutal fistfight in which they end up falling from the roof and Tatiana is fatally impaled. Then, in her dying breath, Tatiana reveals a shocking truth.
No way to stop it.
Elsewhere, Dmitri and Dany are captured by Victor, who takes the duo to the control room, where Arkady and Dmitri are reunited. Arkady, who has since forgiven his brother for his betrayal, announces that together they can restart the revolution and free their people. Then, Arkady asks Dmitri to show his dedication to the cause by killing Dany, and gives him a gun. Now, a reformed civilian who abhors violence, Dmitri decides that his true contribution to his people must be ending the revolution once and for all, and protecting them from certain bloodshed, and hence, to the shock of everyone, kills himself on the spot. Driven to madness by the grief of losing his brother all over again, Arkady shoots and kills Victor. Meanwhile, in the stands, Michael informs Faisal of the situation and orders him to evacuate the fans, causing utter chaos. Then, to the shock of everyone, with only a couple of minutes to full time, Arkady comes on the screen and makes a chilling announcement. As the control room is blown to smithereens, the world comes crashing down on Michael, who's overtaken by sheer grief and guilt and falls to his knees, screaming in agony. Then, in an unexpected turn of events, Michael notices a time difference in 2 clocks in the stadium, realizes that the announcement was pre-recorded, and works out that Arkady used the explosion as a distraction to escape. Hence, Michael gets to his feet and, hoping that Dany is still alive, screams her name at the top of his lungs and sees her being dragged away by Arkady. In the aftermath, a relieved Michael and Dany gladly reunite and are soon relieved to see that Faisal has survived the explosion without a scratch. Moments later, a terrified Rachel arrives and is emotionally reunited with her daughter, who apologizes for everything. And amidst the destruction, the duo embraces with renewed hope for their relationship.